Thanksgiving was Sarah's favorite holiday. She loved everything about it: the warmth of the family gathering, her mom's homemade pies, and the quiet of the remote farmhouse where she'd grown up. This year was a little different. It was just Sarah and her parents. Her siblings were spending the holiday with their own families. It was intimate and simple, just the way she liked it. Dinner was ready by 5 p.m. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, the table was beautifully set, and Sarah's mom was in high spirits. As they sat down, her mom smiled brightly. "Sarah," she said, "we're so glad you brought him." Sarah blinked. "Brought who?" Her mom chuckled and gestured toward the far end of the table. There, sitting silently, was a man she didn't recognize. He was in his early 30s, with short, dark hair, wearing a plain button-up shirt. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Mom," she whispered, "I didn't bring anyone." Her mom's smile faltered. Her dad stiffened, and for a moment, no one moved. But the man just smiled. "Don't mind me," he said in a low, calm voice. "I didn't mean to intrude." Her dad cleared his throat. "How did you get in here?" he asked. The man tilted his head slightly. The door was open. It wasn't. Sarah knew her dad was meticulous about locking up, especially on a secluded property like theirs. Sarah's mom, trying to diffuse the tension, nervously offered the man some turkey. He accepted with a polite nod, but didn't eat. As the meal progressed, Sarah couldn't stop staring at him. He didn't engage in much conversation, but he would occasionally glance at her and smile. The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, her dad stood up. "I think it's time for you to leave." The man didn't argue. He stood, smoothing out his shirt, and walked toward the back door. He paused at the doorway, turned back, and said softly, "Thank you for the meal." Then he stepped out into the night. Her dad locked the door behind him and immediately called the police. Sarah's mom was visibly shaken, repeatedly asking how he could have gotten in. They double-checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked, except the back door. The lock had been broken. When the police arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of the man. It wasn't until Sarah started cleaning up that she noticed the bloody handprint smeared across the white tablecloth, right where the man had been sitting. The lock on the back door wasn't just unlocked. It had been broken, almost as if someone had forced their way in. The family stayed awake all night, listening for any sign of movement. But the man never returned. To this day, Sarah wonders if he was just a lost traveler, or something much worse. Every Thanksgiving, the Carter family reserved a seat at the table for Uncle Henry. It was a strange tradition, especially since no one had ever seen Henry. He was always running late, and the family would joke about saving him a plate. This year, Thanksgiving was held at the old family cabin deep in the woods. The cabin creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, but the warmth of the roaring fireplace and the smell of roasted turkey kept everyone in good spirits. As usual, a single chair at the table sat empty, a plate and glass set before it. Halfway through the meal, the conversation turned to Uncle Henry. "Who is he, really?" asked Sarah, the youngest of the group. "Why do we keep a seat for someone who never shows up?" The laughter around the table was uneasy. Uncle Henry had been part of the family lore for generations, but no one could remember exactly who started the tradition. "He's an ancestor," said Grandma Carter, her voice firm. "It's a family obligation." As the meal went on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should have been, and the wind outside howled like a distant scream. When dessert was served, the lights flickered. Then, with a sharp pop, they went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. The family froze, their murmurs blending with the wind. A soft creak echoed through the room, the sound of the empty chair being dragged backward. "Who's there?" called Sarah's father, his voice trembling. No one answered. The sound of a fork scraping a plate broke the silence. The family turned toward the empty seat, now occupied by a figure they hadn't seen before. Uncle Henry. His face was pale and sunken, his eyes deep hollows that seemed to suck in the light. He grinned, revealing teeth far too sharp for a human mouth. "Thank you for waiting," he rasped, his voice like dried leaves. "Now it's my turn to feast." The candles flared, illuminating the room in a hellish glow as Henry reached across the table. His skeletal fingers grabbed at plates, and then at the family. Screams filled the cabin as one by one, they were dragged into the shadows, their cries swallowed by the darkness. By morning, the cabin was silent. The dining table was spotless, the plates and glasses cleaned and neatly set, except for one. The seat where Uncle Henry had sat was empty again, but his plate was piled high, remnants of his feast smeared across the porcelain. The next year, the Carters didn't gather for Thanksgiving, and no one ever dared to leave that seat empty again. Hollow Hill was a place no one in Ashford ever visited. The dense forest around it was too quiet, too still. No animals, no birds, nothing but an oppressive silence. The locals whispered about it, telling stories of flickering candles that appeared on Halloween night, glowing eerily in the distance. The rule was simple: never approach them. But Lena, curious and skeptical, didn't believe in ghost stories. She decided that Halloween night would be the perfect opportunity to prove they were just that: stories. When Lena entered the woods, the air felt thick and heavy. The trees were twisted and blackened by time, their branches stretching like claws. As the fog closed in around her, she could hear only the sound of her footsteps and the faint rustling of leaves. Then, through the mist, she saw the first candle. It flickered, a pale light in the distance, almost as if it was waiting for her. Lena, her heart pounding with excitement and fear, walked toward it. But as she drew closer, she noticed more candles, dozens of them, lining a path deep into the forest. They glowed brightly in the otherwise dark woods, each one standing still in the air, unaffected by the wind. She followed the path, drawn in by the candle's strange pull. The deeper she went, the colder it became. The air was no longer still. It felt like something was moving around her just out of sight. The trail of candles led her to a clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, covered with symbols she couldn't understand. Around it were figures, tall, thin, their faces hidden in shadow, but their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. The candles flared brighter, and the figures began to move. One of them stepped forward, its hollow face coming into view. The eyes weren't eyes at all, just empty black voids. "You shouldn't have come," the figure whispered, its voice like 1,000 whispers in the wind. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the ground beneath her feet shifted. She turned to run, but the candles moved, blocking her path. No matter where she looked, they surrounded her, their flames burning higher, the air growing heavier. The last thing Lena saw before the darkness consumed her was the faint flicker of the candles, casting long shadows across the clearing. The next morning, the candles were gone. Hollow Hill was as silent as it had always been. And Lena? She was never seen again. But if you stand on that hill on Halloween night, you might just catch a glimpse of a faint flicker of light, moving through the trees, guiding the next curious soul into the darkness. Now you've come this far, please make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more scary videos. Thanks for watching.